I went into 12-step recovery for addiction when I was 17. I went from 24 stone to 11 stone in about 9 months. As a very fat kid, dyslexic, I understood very quickly the value of making people laugh. When I looked at words on the page, I saw stuff that other people didn't see. I could always see a pun. I could always see a double meaning. So it's like the end of The Sixth Sense, you know. I see jokes everywhere.
The Hidden 20% won Best Interview Podcast at the British Podcast Awards, and we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for your support. We really want to do more, so follow, subscribe, and let's get this message out to more people. Our next guest is dyslexic actor, writer, and one of the most familiar faces in British comedy, Marcus Brigstocke. You've probably seen him cracking jokes on QI, Mock the Week, Have I Got News for You, or Live at the Apollo. Maybe you've caught him treading the boards in the West End, or even spotted his iconic cameo in everyone's favourite Christmas staple, Love Actually. But it actually hasn't all been smooth sailing. Marcus has faced his fair share of challenges, from addiction to rehab and an eating disorder. I absolutely love chatting to Marcus. He made me cry with laughter. He was super vulnerable, and listening to his comic superbrain, as he calls it, well, I think you're in for a treat. Let's get into it. Let's see how great minds think differently. Marcus, tell me about your brain.
Well, it's a complicated thing, which is good, isn't it? I mean, you know, I've never met anyone whose brain I didn't think was complicated, but the people whose brains were least complicated have been some of the most boring and or dangerous people I've ever met, because they're like sort of fixed on a single simplistic idea. So my friends, my wife, the company I keep tends to be brains a little bit like mine that notice lots of stuff. That's I think a kind and positive way of expressing it, you know, notice a lot of stuff. I mean, we all know, right? There's loads and loads of people who are getting diagnosed now, particularly with ADHD, amongst other things.
Yep.
And there's lots of complicated thoughts and feelings I have about that. Like anything, the diagnosis is only helpful once you know what you're going to do then.
Yep.
The diagnosis will bring a bit of peace, definitely, and go, oh, Jesus, I've been trying so hard to fit in, right?
Is that how it was for you?
Well, so I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, and I don't think that I have any version of ADHD that would register, you know, like I've got enough to be a comedian, which is pretty good, you know.
Do lots of comedians have ADHD?
Oh, most, like all, maybe. I mean, there's so many of our friends, right, who are going, guys, I've had a consultation today with a doctor, and after a lengthy discussion, I do need to tell you I've been diagnosed with ADHD. And I'm like, yeah, I've been in a car with you, you twitchy. Of course you're a hudder. You're all over the place. Of course you are. Yeah. It's yours. It's your part of your superpower. I've seen your amazing stand-up.
Yes.
Your amazing stand-up is jet fueled by a thing that causes you discomfort elsewhere in your life.
So therefore, why do you not think you have ADHD?
Because I'm not at a point where if I were diagnosed with it, that I would find that of any use to me, right? There's nothing I want to do. It sounds really arrogant, so there's nothing I want to do differently. To come back to your original question about my brain, I mean, there's stuff that underpins a lot of my thinking, which is based in addiction, which we will need to talk about somewhat here. But broadly speaking, you know, I like my brain, and I'm really like, is this true? I just want to check that I'm being honest and not being kind of podcast honest, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
But I would say that I'm content more often than I'm diseased.
Yes.
You know, these days I'm content. I've worked pretty hard on it, and I expect that I will be diseased again, right? That I will be discontented, restless, uncomfortable again. And it's okay, it's fine.
What I hear you say is you're in a good place with your brain at the
I
moment.
am in a good place. So one of the things that happened recently is that I finished a piece of work with a therapist, which I've never done before.
Okay.
So Jimmy Carr, who we'd all assumed was simply a robot, wrote a book that was very personal and then talked quite a lot about much more personal stuff than facade robot Jimmy. And he said some amazing things. And one of the things he said is if you have a therapist, you should at the beginning have 2 or 3 before you work out which one's for you. Don't assume the first therapist you see is the one, and just start telling them everything and hoping. There's a lot of different versions of therapy. There's that. And he also talked about looking for an ending with a therapist. And I think I as someone who's basically been in therapy all my life in one form or another, I was like, yeah, actually, try and finish a thing rather than like the project of me is this ongoing difficult thing and I'm going to keep turning over rocks in my life until I find more pain and then we'll scratch away at that for a bit. That's a never-ending project. I'm not fixed, but I finished a piece of work that fundamentally dealt with a combination of guilt, toxic shame, and trauma about the end of my first marriage.
Okay.
So my first marriage ended when I had an affair, which on the surface of it obviously is a reason for a marriage to end.
Yep.
And also it was more complicated than that, And I needed to not actually sort of carry that around as a brand, in the way that I was.
How were you treated? Because obviously that went public.
Yeah.
How was that?
Well, it was shit because I'd done something that I felt profoundly ashamed of. I had been we need to go back a couple of steps. So I went into 12-step recovery for addiction when I was 17. I got sober when I was really young. I had a very, very dramatic body change. I went from 24 stone to 11 stone in about 9 months. Right, so I lost 13 stone in under a year as I turned 19. That's pretty crazy because my recovery was so obvious to everybody, right? Everybody could see chaos, and then everybody could see he's better. I was quite the hero, quite the golden boy, and I was proud of that and pleased with it, and I stayed sober and it was all good. I mean, there's a special kind of crazy when you first get sober. I hardly need to tell you, right? That actually I think addicts need to have.
Yes.
You need to go nuts in the other direction, join the cult, sign up, go deep, and then also come back.
Yep.
Come back and calm down.
Yeah.
So I'd gone through all of that, and I think that I was quite morally certain in a way that I now feel very uncomfortable thinking about, And then I did the most, not the most immoral thing I could think of, but the most hurtful, secretive, chaotic, devastating thing I could think of. I had an affair that ended up ending my marriage, and there were 2 kids in that mix, And the amount of shame I carried with that was huge. And I didn't, perhaps quite rightly, but I didn't sort of defend myself publicly anywhere when that all was in the newspapers and stuff. Also, it wasn't in very much. I'm not that famous. So my partner at the time was a bit famous. I was a bit famous. It was of scant interest, which made it being in the papers at all really fucking irritating.
Yes.
Like, oh, come on.
Yes.
So I just carried the mess of that around with me, and it had led to a lot of very dysfunctional behavior that I was in denial about. And so I'd stayed sober from drugs, alcohol, and my compulsive eating disorder, but I had become addicted to porn. And I really had no idea that I was addicted to it. I sort of thought I looked at a normal amount of porn.
Yeah.
Well, the normal amount of porn today is not like a normal amount of porn in sort of before the internet.
Yeah, wow.
So
Yeah.
addicts now who have porn addiction, most of them were addicted from about the age of 11 to something that no one knows about.
Yes.
That changes your brain chemistry, like profoundly alters your brain chemistry, that you can't run out of.
Sure.
And you don't need to approach anyone to get it.
Yes.
But
it's free.
But it is free and it will kill you. It will kill you. And there are so many people with different depths of addiction to porn and to, online social media, but porn is the most toxic. So that had all happened sort of underneath and had been this hole that I'd fallen into and had been a very acceptable addiction for me to have.
Yep.
No one knew about it.
Yep.
I didn't feel particularly ashamed because
hurting anyone
it's
else.
not hurting anybody, and it's what men do anyway. I'm the guy, listen, I don't drink, I don't take drugs, I'm careful with food, and also I'm on tour a lot, right? I'm alone in hotel rooms, I'm not being a creep here, I just I'm alone and then I go on my phone or whatever, and then there's daylight and I've been looking at it all night. For the entire night. Right. And you're like, who's that then? What sort of life is that? And the answer is simply not one that I want to have. So I stopped.
Yeah.
I stopped. And it's been such a relief. It's been such a relief. When I went to get help for it, I didn't go expecting that I would never look at porn again. That was not why I was there. And when that was first suggested, I was like, oh no, oh come on. I've got such a list of things I don't do. And after 4 months, I was like, oh, I feel so much better. My brain has a clarity to it, it has a peace to it. And I don't feel ashamed, But
you also knew that feeling of stopping something and it not being actually a negative thing and a piece of deprivation. Exactly. And I can't.
Yeah.
You knew that you can get great benefit.
Exactly. But I also knew what it feels like to stop something and that you have to pass through a soup, and the soup is very hot.
Yes.
And very painful. And it was really painful. And all that stuff about the shame I felt about having let my family down so badly, that's when that all came.
Okay.
It all just came to get me then. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that's what this is, And I always think, if you talk about dealing with something like that, maybe I'm being defensive here, but I think maybe from the outside, people are like, oh, do you feel better, do you? After the thing you did? Did you have a nice chat and feel better now? That's nice for you. How's everybody else? Do you think they're okay yet? Do you know what I mean? And so that you can hear there's that kind of that worry is still built into it.
Have you always been so open?
No, I haven't. But here's the thing that happened. So when I first went into recovery from my addiction, I didn't know. I was really young, but I didn't know that there was anyone else like me. I didn't know there was anyone else who had, for example, eaten food out of bins, who had stolen from people that they loved and were close to them and looked them straight in the eye and said, no, and given them the look that says, you asking me this is so hurtful.
It's so inappropriate.
You are such a bad person for asking me about the thing we both know I did.
Yes.
So when I went in and to recovery, and then there were people who, and you go and you're crying and you go, and I ate from a bin, and someone went, yeah, me too. And you're like, what? And then you realize that keeping things secret for addicts, it'll just kill you. It'll literally kill you. I've known so many friends who've gone back out there, and gone back out there means gone back into their addiction, and they died. It killed them. So I learned when I was very, very young to be open where it's appropriate, I learned a little too late where not to be open, where it isn't safe or wise. And then obviously there've been periods in my adult life where I've kept things secret, and those, like big things, and those have made me ill and untrustworthy and then profoundly lonely. But one of the biggest things about recovery, addiction, being an addict and all the rest of it is if you lie to the people who love you, it is impossible. I'm trying to express this in a way where I don't sound dramatic, but it is impossible for you to feel the love that they have for you because, and I'm talking, parents, spouse, your children, whatever it is, they express either directly or indirectly love for you, and you go, but you don't know what I did.
Yep.
You do not know what I did.
Yeah,
so
I'm
you
not going to let that in.
cannot love me. You cannot. I'm going to try, we're hugging, I'm crying, thank you, I mean it, and all the rest of it. But there's this thing. You don't know what I did. You don't know who I am. So when you show me that you love me, that cannot come through. And so addicts in their addiction are lonely. They are profoundly lonely, completely and utterly alone. And so I've learned that you need secrets from the world. It's really important. Keep your stuff, he says, as he's talked about being a porn addict. But I mean, whatever. There are so many men who need help with that thing. And the only reason I'm willing for people to go, ugh, what dirty right, is because I really hope that any one person listening to this who goes, I sometimes look at stuff and I don't feel okay afterwards, then get help, because feel okay, you deserve to. So that thing about not having a lie that stands between you and anyone who's important to you, it has become essential to me. The other thing I think now about addiction is the reason an addict uses on a Wednesday is because they used on Tuesday. It may also be because an appalling thing happened when they were a kid, maybe, or when they're an adult, some dreadful thing happened and it is worth going and looking for that stuff. But most addicts, in my opinion, me included, are using on a Wednesday because Tuesday involved stealing from someone you love, lying, cheating, and most of all, breaking a promise you made to yourself alone on Monday night.
Yeah.
So Monday night, when it was all said and done, I would go, okay, that was a bad one today, but I'm glad it got as bad as that, because that's it now. That is it.
Yeah.
And this is not a promise for anybody else. This is my promise to me. I'm done. I am done with this.
Yes.
And tomorrow, that's it. I've got a plan. All right. Good night. And you wake up on Tuesday and you're the same you were. And the chaos starts again. And then you break the promise you made yourself. You lie, you cheat, you steal, you use. More chaos, more chaos, more chaos. And you wake up Wednesday and there it is. So a lot of the trauma, a lot of the pain that myself and loads of my friends in recovery have gone looking for to try and heal, in my experience actually, is not as important as make sure you deal with the mess.
Yes.
Like this mess. This mess right now. Yep. Clean this mess up.
So then let me ask you this, what you think about the fact that there was a study done on dyslexia and addiction, people in rehabs, and they found that over 40% of those people in rehabs were dyslexic versus the national average, which is like 45%.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I got lucky. My mum was a teacher, and she spotted when I was very young, before dyslexia was much understood, she spotted that I might be having unusual problems, particularly with reading.
Okay.
And writing and stuff like that. Now, as we understand it better, some sort of slightly cliched views of dyslexia, literally backwards letters, words moving, letters moving, and all that kind of stuff, which is, is quite fundamental to it. But I think now that there's a greater understanding of the neurodiverse plasticity of the brain and how dyslexics look at things. So I got quite a lot of help. I got a huge amount of help, and my dyslexia didn't really cause me a great deal of sort of distress or isolation or problems when I was in school. Some.
Were you embarrassed about being dyslexic?
No, I wasn't. But I think that there were a lot of other things that were taking up the embarrassment quotient.
Yep.
I got very, very overweight when I was very young. And that'll sort of do you. There's not a lot of space for other embarrassment there. You know, there's nowhere to hide when you're fat. Nowhere other than within your own body. But when you're sort of 11, just the very beginnings of puberty as a boy, in the very sort of unguarded schools that I was in, sharing showers with people and stuff like that. And, you know, one or two people have got pubes and one or two people have got noticeably bigger genitals and are starting to look more like men. They're bigger. Well, I had tits. I had a pair of breasts, you know, that fat boys have. So the embarrassment was kind of swallowed up by all of that. And how much store did I put in academic stuff? Maybe not that much. I mean, I don't think I thought that I was clever, but I did enjoy my brain.
Okay.
In a way that I still do. I enjoyed my brain. Like, it sounds kind of arrogant for a comedian, but it's fine. We all are. I knew I was funny.
Even that young?
Yeah, I knew I was funny. Okay. And I really enjoyed making other people laugh. But and the same's true now. I don't ever do a joke that I don't think's funny. Like it tickles me.
Yes.
But I knew I was funny. It's the old stuff. I could do all the teachers. If I couldn't do their voice, I could do their walk. If I couldn't do their walk, I could do their attitude. You know.
Why?
I think that's part of the sort of dyslexic thing, right? So when I looked at words on the page, I saw stuff that other people didn't see. So I couldn't just get through the sentence, which was annoying sometimes, but not very. But I could always see a pun. I could always see a double meaning. I could always see that word sounds like that word. I think, that I could just sort of see the shape of things. And so I can see jokes, It's like the end of The Sixth Sense, I see jokes everywhere. I do. I see funny stuff everywhere in the shape of things. I could see the bones of a teacher, if you know what I mean. I could see one thing about them that was interesting or good or kind of where's the juice. And I'm sure I learned quite quickly as a very fat kid, dyslexic, and building the pile of shame, isolation, all that kind of stuff. I understood very quickly the value of making people laugh. This is instant feedback, right? If you laugh, I did my job. I did it.
Yeah.
I know you've understood
I'm trying not to laugh now.
Yeah, right. If you laugh, I know you've understood what I meant. You must have done because you laughed. Either that or you're having a chimp response and you're so nervous. Yeah. So I think I understood the value of that, and it made me feel included. I was too fat for sport, couldn't join in there, wasn't ever the cleverest. I did okay, but I was never the cleverest. I wasn't sort of conventional in any of the things I wanted to do, but I could make people laugh. I could play a good game too. I could construct a game with people, a fantasy-based game that would last for years, actually. One thing that would last for years. It might be a single joke or a nonsense or a fantasy or whatever. There was a tree we used to climb. This is the school I was at from the age of 7. There was a tree we used to climb called the Hell Tree because it was sort of, we gave it a power. There was a line coming down the Hell Tree called the Jaguar because it was sort of slippery and moved like a jaguar. And it was basically climbing this very big tree and then sliding down the outside of it. And even though I was fat, I could do all of those things. But the Hell Tree is like quite a good example of buying into the mythology of something and creating a narrative around it. And I so enjoyed that.
Are you a good, big picture thinker?
Yeah. I am, but I'm also distracted on the way, right? So it's
ADHD.
Ada hudda, maybe ada hudda.
I've not heard someone say that.
Ada hudda. There isn't time to say ADHD. It takes too long. Say ada hudda. There's things to do. Guys,
I've not heard that.
Sorry,
before.
guys, I'm ada hudda. Yes. So it's a great source of satisfaction to me that as someone who's dyslexic, that I've written loads of narrative comedy. I've created hours of narrative comedy, always with help. So I'm really hugely proud of that and lots of other stuff that I've created. But it is true to say that when I'm trying to create a narrative or tell a whole story, I will be pulled very strongly in the direction of a joke, which is good. I mean, I'm writing comedy, right? So I'll be pulled that way rather than thinking about, well, does the story stand up? Is the whole story funny? Is it pleasing? And that's where I need help. But I mean, that's why I like collaborative, I like collaborative working. And that's where I think that our brains, to come all the way back to pretty much the first thing I said, I like my brain. I like my busy brain. And I probably like it best of all when it's vibrating up against yours. Right? And someone else's who has a different vibration. That's where music is, right? Yep. And that's where comedy is. That's where stories get made. Some people just do stories on their own and great, fine, whatever. For me, working with someone practically who's like, no, now we need a scene change to happen. Otherwise, this will be one scene that's just a string of jokes. But, someone else's brain that vibrates a little differently from mine. And then we find a genuine magic trick. Right? The magic that has come into existence through working with other funny people, it didn't exist before we made it. We literally made something magic happen. And I have a joyful, childlike reverence for that stuff. I used to live with Ross Noble, right, in Edinburgh at the festival. We used to share flats. I have no idea if Ross knows he's dyslexic, but he's definitely dyslexic. Listen, I'm no doctor, but I'm willing to diagnose that one. I've seen how he lives, what his notes look like, and I've seen his shows. Ross, literally, so he's filled me with so much delight when I've seen him on stage. Millions of comics have. But Ross literally spun stuff out of the air. Stuff that wasn't there, it didn't exist, and then he made it and then it disappeared again. And it's like, that's such a delightful and enchanting magic trick for me. And that all comes back to like, well, how does my brain work? Yeah. Well, it does that. I talked to there's a great comic who's also a great sort of scholar of comedy called Stu Goldsmith. But I talked to Stu Goldsmith years ago about comic superbrain, which sounds arrogant, but basically I could have a routine, right? A thing that I've worked on that I know works and is very funny. And then something occurs to me on stage in the moment in front of hundreds of people that accesses a part of my brain that was shut until that moment. And it only ever happens on stage. And it's why sometimes, Eddie Izzard or Susie, as she now prefers to be known. But
also neurodivergent.
Yeah. What? Who? Wow. The guy who did 26 marathons in 26 days is neurodivergent. We are learning stuff here. Of course we are. Like, look at Eddie's brain, Susie's brain. I'm not correcting myself when I say Eddie and Susie, by the way. Very pleasingly, Eddie, who I got to know, said, I prefer to be called Susie, but you can't make a mistake. Okay. Which I really like. And that's not everybody's experience, but I really like it. But anyway, everybody's seen a moment of discovery and creation when they've seen Eddie Izzard on stage, right? They've been like, oh, that was something magical shifted there. And like, there it is, that kind of, that super brain access. And I've no idea whether mine is related to neurodiversity, dyslexia, or anything else, but I think it is. I think it probably is.
What I'm learning from you is that there's a high proportion of comedians that are neurodivergent. And so, guess what? And I'm not a rocket scientist. Can we put some of that comedic
Yeah.
magic down to people's brains? I think we can.
Definitely.
And can we put that particular comedic magic down to particular brains that are neurodivergent?
100%. But I'm cautious about the kind of neurodiversity is our superpower thing.
Don't go down that
because
route.
I don't agree with it. Because also for loads of people, it's a source of terrible pain.
100%.
And a gateway into sometimes social isolation, sometimes into dysfunction, sometimes into addiction.
How about prison, suicide,
100%.
unemployment, divorce, etc.
Absolutely.
Mental health.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have to be, I feel like I want to be very cautious about that thing of like, it's not a superpower, but it is also, for me, a really helpful gateway into, well, this is what I've made a really, really, never mind successful, really happy career doing. You know, it's brought me loads of joy and some difficulties.
Apart from the lawyers' conference in the US. You remember that one?
The one where I was hand clapped off? That was
slow.
That was a bad off. So I was hosting. This is great. You'll love this. Do you know the backstory to this? So I was asked to host the UK Bar Awards. So I went, okay, well, look, I don't drink, but, you know, I've been in a lot of bars. I know how this works. And then I got there and I was like, these are some smart looking people for people who run bars, and not what I was expecting. It was the legal bar. And I was able to honestly say to them, I had prepped for a gig where you were all basically bartenders, which they found mildly funny. But because I was so nervous then about that gig, because I felt like I have not prepared well for this, I smashed it. I had such a good gig because I was just firing. Comic Superbrain was everywhere because I was compensating. And they were like, my God, this guy, he's something. We do an affiliate version of this in the United States. Would you like to be flown first class to New York to address a bunch of American lawyers at the Cipriani? It's beautiful. It used to be a bank. It's all marble pillars. And I went on and I was slow hand clapped off in the first section of the evening, knowing that I had to go back on twice more to a room full of people who really hated me. They really hated me. One of them, a lawyer, heckled me just with the word steak because he knew the main course was steak. I went, don't slow hand clap me. I just asked him not to. I have to be kind of polite. I was like, that's not helping, is it? we're just trying to get through this thing joyfully. And he just went, steak, which meant get on with it. I want my meat. I went, Jesus, I hope you're no one's defense lawyer. You're so inarticulate. Don't just say steak to me. We all want steak. Oh, it was bad. It was bad. But a death that bad is pretty funny. That's pretty funny.
It's making me cry. And it's the second time I've heard it.
Yeah, there are fewer lonelier places than dying on your ass on stage because of that feedback thing that I like so much of like, if you laugh, I'm doing my job, then my God, if you're not laughing, I know I'm not doing my job. And then you're like, I'm so alone up here.
So speaking of those jobs, we obviously met at the podcast awards.
Yeah. Oh, there's one. Eesh. That was a tough room.
Was that a tough room?
Mate, yeah. So anything where there's a division in a room is very hard to play. Okay. Always hard to play.
Why?
Because you're, as a comic, you're trying to create a single moment. I speak, reach a point, and everybody laughs all together. Which is why if people are on their phone, having a discussion, having a row, dropping a drink, it doesn't work. Heckling works great. Heckling's great. You're now there's a conversation, right? That's okay. It's fine. It's really fine. Heckling's so easy.
Okay.
But people don't heckle nowadays. They go on their damn phone or they talk to each other about their day and you're like, that's annoying for me, but you've ruined the night of all the people who are into this.
Because they're checking out. They're disengaging.
Because they're disengaged from the room. So it's always about creating a singular moment. So it was always going to be hard. Also, I really wanted it to go well. Also, there were quite a few comics in the room. So that's comics don't watch each other do corporates.
Okay.
We don't we all do gigs
Yes.
together. We all sometimes have a death, and that's fine. The language is so dramatic, isn't it?
Sorry,
I killed, I
have a
slayed,
death.
I took the roof off, or I died. It's so dramatic. It's not true. A death means silence.
Okay.
It means you died.
Okay.
We would say I died on my ass. But yeah, it was a very uncomfortable opening 7 minutes.
I really enjoyed it,
Oh,
and I
bless you, man.
laughed.
Thank you.
And then I really enjoyed, and we got really excited when you said, by the way, I'm not going to look at my script because I'm dyslexic.
Ah, yes. Well, it's true.
And do you usually do that? Do you usually?
Yeah, it's partly because there's a thing for me to say about it, but also because even though I've made my whole career in writing and reading, right? So most of the work I've done especially on Radio 4, is literally standing, reading a script out loud, which ought to be, the stand-up's a little different. I create it. I learn it by doing, and then, so that's very kind of within the world of suits my brain, But if I'm reading a script that is a mixture of, and now let's have a look at the nominees for best, and there are different shaped words. There are often names that are unrecognizable to me because they're so unfamiliar, people from all over the world. And that will make me tense, because to come back to, was it embarrassing being dyslexic? Mostly no. But also, yeah, sure, of course. There are moments in a classroom where you're like, I'm thick and they can see me. Everyone can see me being thick and failing, and I'm stupid. And I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. And that's very exposing for a child. And I think I rush to there, if I got stuck on something I was reading at an award ceremony, that would be, I'd hate that. I'd really hate that. I think I'd dance around it. I'd find a way, and I'd just smile and go, got stuck there. I don't know what this word is, guys. I don't know why you're even using this word. I could be funny about it.
But these are the tactics that are so inbuilt in you from such an early age to get by, fit in, get round, move forward, get work, whatever it is. Yeah, you adapt.
Yes, exactly. And adaptation can be really painful. And I think masking is definitely really painful for a lot of people, and can make you feel very lonely, very isolated, sometimes ashamed, because there's that veneer of dishonesty between you and other people and all of that. But I would also say that the idea of the in on fitting in, what does in mean? In with who? Because no one's normal. There isn't a central character who's the normal one. So the feelings I have about fitting in are the same for the people who appear to me to be in, regardless of whether they have any neurodivergence, any obvious trauma or completely undiscovered trauma, or anything else. Maybe their particular issue is I fear constantly I'm boring. I'm so boring. I have nothing about me. I'd have no idea. But the in is a little bit of a myth. And I think for me, in terms of like masking or protecting myself by saying, for example, just so you know, before I read all these words written down here, I'm dyslexic, so we may be here a while. There's a bit of masking there. There's a bit of self-defense there and all the rest of it. Also, love it.
Yeah.
I love the tickle of that.
So you said on the night, I'm not going to bother looking at the script because I'm dyslexic. And then you went straight in. It was almost like a kind of reveal, smack you with the best joke that I've got.
Yeah.
And have some of that. Charlie, who runs all our social and our marketing, when we, it was such a surprise to win that award. I can't tell you. So then to come up on stage and thank God Charlie, had the nous to kind of go, let me get a badge and give it to Marcus. And he came back and was like, Marcus just took the badge and just said, like, I know what that is. I'm going to put it on.
My badge was already on my suit jacket lapel before you had sat back down. It was straight on. Listen,
how did you know about that?
I sort of intuitively knew you were my people. You were also genuine, and I'm not blowing smoke up your arse here. You were also genuinely some of the happiest to win and the funnest when you came up. You were so fun, and I'm like, this actually touches on a more serious point, but I liked the kind of, I think you might be my people. The more serious point there is about tribes. So I think it's really important to find your tribe. However, social media, I think, has amplified the idea of what tribes we belong in and which tribes we don't belong in. And I think whilst it's really helpful to wear your green dot and say, hey, I'm one of you guys. Mm-hmm. I'm one of you. Be a member of some other tribes too, because I know some people, and I've been that person, especially in early recovery, whose whole personality is, this is me, this is my tribe, this is who I am. But our tribes are, I'm neurodiverse, I'm dyslexic, I'm an addict in recovery. That's an important aspect of which of those tribes I belong in. I'm a man.
Yep.
That's a tribe. I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I'm a son, I'm a comedian.
Yep.
Loads of tribes, and they all intersect with each other. So I am a little bit cautious about the extent to which at any given time, I can quite easily identify myself as belonging mostly to one thing, and I don't.
Yeah, and I don't kind of define myself as, I'm autistic. Mm-hmm. And I don't define myself as any of the things that I am, I guess, father in recovery, etc. I just kind of go, well, I'm on this planet and I'm part of the human species and I'm part of the population.
Yeah.
And I do worry also when people's identity becomes all about one thing, whether that's a positive thing, a negative thing, because the worst thing that could happen is certainly within neurodivergence, that it becomes a bit them versus us.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of blame. Yeah, you neurotypical people, you people that don't understand us. And
They're not real.
They're not real. We're really clear that even with the green badges, I don't know if your wife's neurodivergent or not, but there's a bag outside with a badge for her.
Nice.
Because it's about showing support. What do you say about the fact that 85% of children who are diagnosed dyslexic today, now, 2024, are incredibly ashamed of that?
It's so sad to me to think that a kid might be told that and feel ashamed of it or embarrassed about it, or even, to be honest, from my experience, think that now there's a mountain in front of them that they have to climb, because that isn't true. Do you know about Ken Robinson,
yes,
the educationalist? I mean, so that some of the simplest, best stories he tells. One of my favorite ones is about this girl who was really struggling in school, and she wouldn't sit still, and she was constantly fidgeting, and she was described as a fidget. And he had such a beautiful way of expressing himself. And he said she wasn't a fidget, she was a dancer. And she was allowed to get up and dance. Mm-hmm. And that's what she was. She was a dancer in the same way, no one's one thing, but like in the same way some of the kids were brilliant at swimming or at maths or at languages or whatever. This kid happened to have dance inside her, trying to get out. And, education has a shape. It needs to. But it has failed. Gove and Cummings particularly made this much, much more difficult for people with the reforms that they brought in, and referring to teachers as the blob. They love these stupid, boring, anodyne descriptions of their enemies as one thing or another. And they made it much harder for kids who are dyslexic, for example, by basically stripping out the other stuff in school that they might feel they're good at. I think, and it's quite a simplistic, childlike view, I think that if a kid leaves school feeling that there isn't something that they're good at, then all of us, that child particularly, will suffer as a result of that.
That's a failure.
That kid will hurt people. They will hurt people. They'll hurt themselves probably more than anybody else. They will, because because they've been let down so badly by something. And listen, I'm from posh, right? I'm from a posh, privileged background where I've very rarely felt that I wasn't of some use. I've certainly had my moments. Because, the means meant that there was always something for me to do.
Yeah, but dyslexia, addiction, etc. doesn't care about where you're from.
No, it does not. It makes no difference.
It really doesn't.
But money buys time, and time means that there's a resource there, and often that resource is a safety net. I got caught. I'd be dead. I would be dead for sure had I not gone into recovery. I didn't have a lot of road left to run. And I know because people I went into early recovery with just died. They just went straight off and died, and it was profoundly shocking.
They said to me, you only need to buy one thing, and that's a black suit.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
I was like 20 years old hearing this going, what are you talking about?
Absolutely.
But it's true.
Yeah, your friends are going to die. That's what's going to happen. People who will share with you quite quickly their innermost thoughts and feelings, people you will get very close to very quickly, they will die.
How do we break this cycle? And I'm sort of talking for young dyslexic people who are embarrassed and ashamed about it, or neurodivergent kids and young people. How do we break this cycle?
I think it's in part by making sure that there is a thing that those kids can get good at, that they can know that they're good at that thing. And for me, it was performing from very young. There was a head teacher who used the withdrawal of the opportunity to perform as a punishment for me. So when my behavior became more dysfunctional, and it did, I was a pain, he stopped me being in the school play. And I'm like, oh, you idiot, you're so bad at your job. You're so bad at your job. Understand that's the thing I'm good. That's not a privilege that I was exercising there. That's the thing I'm good at. Don't take that away. If you want me to conform a bit more, get me to do more of that.
Yeah.
Guess what? Not only will I be good at it, and that's important for all of us, you'll also get a show. I'll give you a hell of a show.
Yep.
I promise you that. So I don't know what the thing is. It might be sport, it might be dancing, it might be comedy, it might be acting. A lot of it's creative. Some of it will be physical. I think creative obviously is the thing I understand the most. There's a brilliant, brilliant charity called Arts Emergency that Josie Long set up. And Josie is such a brilliant comic and such a wonderfully kind person. She's super smart. Super, super smart. And she's not from a privileged background like me. And I remember so well talking to her when she was very young about this, about access to the arts and how it was just disappearing. It's not their fault, but the resources for schools to give people space, access to the arts in the poorest parts of the country where it's needed the most has been withdrawn. Because Gove and Cummings primarily thought it wasn't very important. It's not as important as remembering a list of the kings and queens.
Absolutely.
But
Revision.
It is more important than remembering a list of the kings and queens.
Yeah.
Guess what you can do?
Yeah.
You could play one of them.
Yeah.
You could play 2 of them or 5 of them yourself in one show.
Yeah.
You could try and play all of them in a single show. I promise you that's better than remembering the list.
Yes.
It's not that important.
Yes.
Whereas giving a young person with plasticity in their brain the opportunity to go, today I was both Anne Boleyn and King Henry VIII, right? Or whatever their thing is, and let them leave feeling that they're really good at something. If you want a really cold version of that, that kid will cost you less. In the end, they will just cost you less money.
Oh,
in their life.
The economic argument is so easy.
Yeah.
Whichever way you approach it, like you want less people in prison, you want less blah, 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 blah.
Exactly. So I hope that, I guess the more likely thing is that parents of dyslexic kids might hear this.
Yes.
You can help them, the parents. It's not a question of of gently saying, now there's nothing to be ashamed of. That might be in the mix, but it's more like, I bet you your kid's great at something.
Yeah.
I absolutely bet you they are. Find that thing and do it.
So we asked you to bring an item that represents your brain.
Oh, yeah.
What did you bring?
This is...
Describe it for me, please.
This is a yellow and white child's plastic electric-powered fan with a duck's face in the middle of it. Why is this my brain? Well, it's cheap, and no one's sure where the charger is. I thought it was quite a good description for my brain. The way my brain whizzes can bring a bit of comfort to all sorts of people, me included.
Yep.
So it's by no means, the whirring and the whizzing is by no means a bad thing. I don't give a toss.
You need some whiz.
I don't give a toss whether I'm at a hooder or not. If it stands in the way of me having connections with the really important people in my life, then I'll need to change some things. I may need some help with that. Same now with my dyslexia. You know, it's become a thing that's absolutely part of how I approach language, how I approach the construction of sentences, creating jokes. It's very largely a good thing. Also, I've never not had it, right? So imagining a version of me that doesn't have that is just too weird. I might like that guy very much, but I don't know who he is yet. So
yeah, and I don't think he'd be that funny. I'm really struck by, we talked about some really serious stuff today. I've cried with laughter. I think what I take away from today is like, you can be funny and vulnerable.
Yeah.
And you don't just have to be funny to hide vulnerability.
No.
And I think that's a massive strength that you have that I really admire.
Oh, thanks, man.
Because there's no way in hell I'd stand on stage and try and make people laugh. So I'm already in like, you're a lunatic because you want to do that. But yeah, thank you.
I'm so pleased you said want, not need. There's a worrisome truth that sits under that idea. And I think there have been times in my life where I've needed that. I've literally needed the approval of strangers.
Yep.
And I would say now,
huge dopamine seeking,
massive
behavior.
Yeah. And I would say now, I want it.
Yep.
I don't need it. I'm okay.
Yeah, which is lovely.
I'm okay without. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on Hidden 20%.
Hey, man.
I really enjoy talking to you.
I'd really like to stay in touch as well, you know, like I just instantly liked your whole gang at the podcast awards. We were instantly like, oh, this is easy and fun. This has been a treat as well.
Thank you.
As long as you don't mind a bit of that.
Because I'm autistic, I think differently. And back in 2015, I wanted people to drink differently. So I created Seedlip, the world's first distilled non-alcoholic spirits. I took Seedlip from my kitchen to 35 countries and the world's best bars, restaurants, and retailers. And we did it in 3.5 years. It was wild. They're delicious. They're intriguing. They're these distilled botanical blends you can just mix with tonic or have in a cocktail. You really don't need another sickly, horrible mocktail. Check us out on seedlipdrinks.com or Amazon and let me know what you think.